Good evening and welcome to Museum Nights. It's May 13th, 2021 at the Harn Museum of Art at the University of Florida in Gainesville, Florida. I'm Eric Siegel, Director of Education at the museum, and it's a real pleasure to be here with you once again for a virtual Museum Nights. We're looking forward to one or two more of these, and then we'll be live in the museum again come the fall term. So watch our website, harn.ufl.edu, for updates on Museum Nights online and virtual for the next month or so, and then switching over to in-person. Tonight's theme, Museum Night, Everyday Extraordinary, is inspired by the current exhibition of art work, Korean artwork in the Korean Gallery. The exhibition is called From Everyday or Everyday to the Extraordinary, highlights of the Korean art collection. And it's a really wonderful experience. You're going to get to know quite a bit about it tonight online, and you'll have a chance then when you're in town and free to visit the museum. The museum is open to the public, free as always, open Tuesday through Sunday. So please check our website for hours, harn.ufl.edu, and make a visit. On the weekends, there's plenty of free parking. It's a great way to spend the day. So we hope you'll come be inspired by tonight's event to see the Asian Wing and visit the Korean Gallery. Tonight we have, lots of conversation about poetry, about art, and about food. We've got wonderful guests. We're live. We've got some pre-recorded content, some live conversation. We're going to welcome your questions and comments in the YouTube chat box. So if you'll write any notes in there you have, we'll be watching that and we'll bring it on board when we have a chance for Q&A and conversation. We'd love to hear your thoughts, any questions you have, any contributions you might want to make. Tonight's event is a Museum Nights. Museum Nights are the second Thursday of every month. We have a number of other events online, especially right now, and coming in the future more in person. For online, you can see right now in the corner of the screen, or making up most of the screen, you can pick up our last Family Day gallery guide or activity guide, which is Captivating Creatures. It's an amazing activity guide created by a UF student intern with our staff, and it's just filled with dozens of activities inspired by dragons and tigers and other creatures. Also coming up on June 4th is Tot Time, Super Shapes. That will be, of course, online as well, and on the screen you can see harn.ufl.edu/Harn at Home, all one word, is where you're going to find that activity, and probably another 50 activities that you can do at home, and in most cases with very simple home and art supplies. So real great ways to stretch your creative thinking right at home for all ages. Tot Time, of course, for the younger ages. Let's see, what else do we want to share tonight? I want to let you know that we're going to be joined by Mie Bang, who is my current intern. She's a graduate student in English, a doctoral candidate, and is going to introduce us to some Korean poetry. She'll be here via pre-recorded video, and then will join us for some additional live comments, and you can bring some questions as well. The Harn's new curator started in March 1st. The Cofrin Curator of Asian Art is Tongyun Yin, and she'll be speaking tonight via video and then joining live about plum blossom vase paintings. I'm really excited about that. It's a wonderful topic. And we'll have a number of insights with Allysa Peyton into the exhibition she curated, Everyday to the Extraordinary. We'll learn a lot about the art and something about how museums handle and manage art and keep it healthy, wealthy, and wise. And then finally, we're going to be joined by Dr. Ken Alba, who's professor of history at the University of the Pacific in California. He's an amazing food historian, food blogger, food writer. You can find him on the internet and on paper and on video, and he'll be introducing us to the mystery of noodles. He'll be doing a food demo. Very excited about that, and it connects directly to the exhibition. I think that is all of our preliminary content that I wanted to make sure to share with you. Let's dive right in with an introduction to the exhibition, Everyday to the Extraordinary, which will be presented by Allysa Peyton, Assistant Curator of Art at the Harn Museum.
So good evening, welcome to Museum Nights. I'm Allysa Peyton, the Assistant Curator of Asian Art, and we are in the gallery of Everyday to the Extraordinary, which is highlights from the Korean collection. Some of the ideas behind this exhibition are to connect tangible objects with other types of cultural heritage. So everyday experience, living tradition, food and cooking, trade, poetry, music, all those kind of invisible connections that you might not see when you're just looking at an object in a case. So when you first enter the gallery, you'll notice that it's a little bit darker than some of the other galleries in the museum, and this was because of a grant given to us by the National Museum of Korea, and special equipment, including motion sensors and case lighting. And the reason behind this is to make sure that the light levels that each object receives during the course of the exhibition remain as small as possible. So we want to make sure that we're conserving and preserving these objects for generations to come. So one of the most extraordinary objects in the exhibition is this hanging scroll painting by Kim Hong-do. He was a 18th century court painter in the Joseon dynasty, and he was considered one of the most eminent painters of his time. It has never been displayed at the Harn Museum because its condition was too fragile. So in 2013, we received a grant from the Overseas Korea Cultural Heritage Foundation in order to have it conserved in Seoul. So the condition now is stable enough so you'll be able to see it during a short run during the exhibition. And one of the things that I love about this scroll is that it's really an intersection between several different worlds. So Kim Hong-do, he's a court painter, but he was really interested in the everyday experience. So he painted people from all walks of life, genre paintings showing nobles, everyday folks, people traveling on the road, getting food at restaurants. And this particular painting shows a falcon hunt. Another intersection is that the conservation really represents that intersection between the technology we have today with this national treasure, and how the knowledge of the conservator, using science and technology and art historical insight, was able to preserve this to a stable condition.
It is so exciting to have the exhibition on view and the scroll on view that Lisa was just discussing, the falcon hunt. It is beautiful, and as you saw from the detailed reproductions, there's so much to explore, and it's so beautifully conserved. So we invite you to come in and examine it for yourself in the beautifully lit gallery of the Korean gallery in the Asian wing. The next video introduction, of course, Allysa is going to join us momentarily, and Tongyun will join us. The next video introduction is by our new Curator of Asian Art, the Cofrin Curator of Asian Art, Tongyun Yin. The audio quality is a little rough at the beginning, so you might need to turn up your mic a little bit later, but give it a moment. There are subtitles to get you through the technical difficulties. I think you'll enjoy this a great deal. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Tongyun Yin, the Cofrin Curator of Asian Art at the Harn Museum of Art. I'm very delighted to have this opportunity to join you all today to talk about Korean art. My colleague Allysa has curated such an amazing show to highlight some of the best works of art in our Korean collection. If her introduction on what are on view right now in the gallery has whetted your appetite to come visit the exhibition very soon, I hope by showing you another piece of artwork that will be included in the exhibition in this October will convince you to come back again in the fall. Now let me share with you my screen. Here on the screen, I show you a very panel screen painting that will be displayed displayed in the exhibition Every Day to the Extraordinary in this October. This painting depicts an old weathered plum tree with spring blossoms against a bland background. The theme of the plum blossom appeared as early as the Kodo dynasty in Korea during the 10th century. Korean artists' appreciation for the flowering plum was influenced by Chinese paintings. In Chinese art, plum blossom, pine tree, and bamboo are collectively known as the three friends of the cold season. Together, they have been popular visual art motifs to represent virtuous gentlemen who overcome difficult times ever since the 9th and 10th centuries. In Korea during the Joseon dynasty, from the late 15th century to the early 20th century, Korean scholar officials adopted the subject to represent their idealized self-image as pure and solemn Confucian gentlemen. The plum blossom was separated from its other two friends, bamboo and pine tree, and became an independent subject in Korean art. This screen painting is a very good example for us to see how Korean artists adopted the subject and styles from their Chinese counterparts, but creatively produced a work of art with unique Korean characteristics. This painting is painted in monochrome ink because the plum blossoms were cherished by Koreans for its pure color of white as symbols of the noble character. Different from Chinese plum blossom painting that normally only depict a few branches of flowers. This screen painting represents a large section of the tree trunk, the boughs, the branches, laden with flowers. The contrast between the old appearance of the trunk and the boughs, and the new slender yet strong stalks in the right corner, provide both spatial depth and a combination of power and delicacy. The trunk of the tree and the boughs were painted in a Chinese painting technique called flying white brush strokes. This is an effect achieved when the painter used a semi-dry brush and skimmed across the surface of paper rapidly, leaving these irregular wet patches. The abundant blossoms are depicted in delicate outlines and ink dots to add a refinement that is in contrast with the aged trunk and branches rendered in expressive calligraphic brush strokes. The asymmetrical but completely balanced composition reflects the distinctive Korean taste. What makes this painting very refreshing is there is no conflict between realism and imagination. Korean characters were invented in 1446, but many Korean painters continue the tradition to write inscriptions in Chinese in the 20th century. The inscription on this painting reads, "The color of the spring are all over the Mount Luofu," and signed by the painter with 3 of his seals. The reference of Mount Luofu is most likely derived from a poem by an 11th century Chinese scholar painter, Su Shi. In Su Shi's poem, it says, "The flowering plum village at the foot of Luofu Mountain. The flowering plum's bones are of jade and snow, and their souls of ice." When this painting is put on view in October, I encourage you to compare the painting with another artwork on display in the gallery. This porcelain vase has a broader shoulder and a very simple profile. This shape of vessel is called maypyeong in Korean. Mei means plum blossom, and Gun means vase. This white porcelain is decorated with a branch of flowering plum. The branch and flowers are painted in underglaze cobalt blue with touches of red, which means the ceramist used cobalt oxide and copper oxide as colorants to paint on the dry vessel before applying a transparent glaze over the design. On the other side of the vase, there is a line of poem from a poem composed by a 13th century Chinese painter, Xue Yu. The poem on the vase is translated as, "The flowering plum faces a cold alone, but maintains its purity." Next to the line are two characters, Wenbo, which is the sobriquet name of Korean painter Kim Ki-chang. Kim Ki-chang is a leading painter in 20th century Korea, best known for his figurative and abstract works. He was also a strong advocate of reviving Korean artistic and cultural traditions, which were disrupted by Japanese invasion and colonization from 1910 to 1945. Again, this piece shows how Korean artists followed Chinese footsteps, mastered the technique and decorative skills, then produced works of art that in the Chinese manner, but distinctively Korean to meet their own functional needs and aesthetic sensitivities. The decoration of this vase is composed quite differently from Chinese ceramic wares. The bottom part of this vessel is completely undecorated, in sharp contrast to the many Chinese porcelains that are heavily embellished throughout the entire body. The decoration here is only concentrated on the upper part of the vessel. The composition again is asymmetrical, different from the emphasis on symmetry in Chinese designs. You probably have guessed why these two artworks are related. It is not only that the depicted motifs are the same, both flowering plums, but these two works also show a long-standing tradition in Korean art. Scholars have known that throughout Korean history, it was a custom for the painters in the Royal Painting Academy at the court to go to ceramic studios to teach the potters how to paint. Sometimes the painter produced copybooks to give to the ceramist for them to learn the decorative motifs. The result of this collaboration is some decorations on Korean porcelains are very close to representations on paintings. We don't know for sure if the painter Kim Ki-chang painted the plum blossom on the vase himself, or his painting served as a model for the decoration of the porcelain. But still we can see the enduring relationship between Korean painting and ceramics. Most importantly, we see the painter's new creation on the porcelain. Copper was used as a coloring agent to create red colors on the flowers, which shows a very different visual effect from the monochrome ink painting. We know in 1970, Kim Ki-chang dissociated his artistic practice from Western abstract art and revisited the Korean artistic tradition. This phase probably was an experiment of the artist's endeavor to create a national style of Korean painting by assimilating the element of Western colored painting with Korean ink arts. I hope you will enjoy this exhibition and the objects on display. Thank you very much.
What an amazing discussion based on a very simple motif, right? The plum blossom. And yet I'm really excited by the way we've been introduced to both sort of the exchange between artistic practices, ceramics and painting, and exchange and engagement and disengagement between Chinese and Korean art, between Korean and Western art. Fantastic. Some of that is going to be picked up in the next section of this evening's program, in which Mi Bang talks about a poem and a Korean poem, and a little bit about its context and its relationship to the Japanese occupation of Korea. So I think you'll see a little resonance there, and this will make for interesting points of conversation when we all come together to talk in a little while. So please enjoy this next section, after which Mie will join us live to provide some additional context as well.
Hello everyone, I am Mie Bang. I'm a PhD candidate in English here at UF. I study Victorian poetry and I also pursue a graduate certificate of museum studies. So this summer I work at the Harn as an intern in the Department of Education. As an international student from Korea and also as one studies poetry specifically, and also as one who works for the Harn's educational programs, I'm really happy to introduce a poem called Seungmu, the Nun's Dance, which describes the dance you see in the Korean wing in the pictures and also in the video. Before I read and introduce the poem, I really just briefly want to share some context about the poem and the poet. The Nun's Dance, the poem I read today, is a short lyric poem written by Ji-un Cho. He was born in 1920 when Korea was still under the rule of Japan. He actively worked as a poet and literature critic and also activist around 40s until 60s. And the Nun's Dance, the poem I'm reading today, was published in 1939, even before the emancipation of Korea. So when I read the poem, you will see this poem might seem and also sound to you just to focus on spiritual and transcendental beauty of the traditional kind of Buddhist dance. But however, I want to note that Ji-un Cho, not only in this poem itself, but over his kind of literary career, he intentionally chose these traditional forms of Korean art as his artistic subjects to reconnect and rebuild and rediscover the heritage of Korean art after experiencing a very threatening period with cultural and political ruptures. I want to add, and then a note, two things that you can catch from this poem. So one thing is nabilera. It's a word, like a neologism, a new word created in this poem, and still it's quite famous in Korean language. I don't mean that it's used in a kind of casual way, but rather as a kind of artistic poetic language, it's still used in Korean song lyrics or a TV drama titles, kind of that. So Ji-un Cho created this word by compounding two words. 나비 means a butterfly, and 나불거리다 or 나불대다 is a verb, meaning flutter or wavers, like wavers by the slight breezes. And he compounded these words into nabilera, capturing butterflies kind of movement in the breeze. And he used that word to describe this nun's dances, kind of folded head and their movements. So you will see it repeats at the beginning and at the end of the poem. And the other one I want to note is Ji-un Cho's poem really captures a larger shape of the dance. I mean, he really focuses on the kind of curved and ascending lines and movements of the dance overall, which is not just made by the nuns, the dancers' bodily movement, but completed by the dancers' costumes, including the folded hats and then very long sleeves and then pointed socks here. So you will see these words will come up. Before reading it, I just need to note that I will read twice this poem in Korea and also later in an English version. As I just told you about nabilera, this poem is really, really hard to translate. However, I found very good translations. One is from Keimyung University's website. Unfortunately, I found there was no translator's name, and the other one is from a Columbia anthology of modern Korean poetry, which was done by Kevin O'Rourke in Keimyung University. I use these two versions, but They are really beautiful to read on the page. However, tonight my purpose is to convey the meaning of the poem orally, so I chose more easy and then more kind of instinctively understood words for you. So I want to thank these two translators. Let me read in Korean first. 승무, 조지훈. 얇은 사 하이한 곶갈은 고이 접어서 나빌래라. 파르라니 깎은 머리 박사 곶갈에 감추오고 두 볼에 흐르는 빛이 정작으로 고와서 서러워라. 빈대의 황촛불이 말없이 녹는 밤에 오동잎 잎새마다 달이 지는데 소매는 길어서 하늘은 넓고 돌아설 듯 날아가며 사뿐히 접어올린 외씨 버선이여. 까만 눈동자 살포시 들어 먼 하늘 한개 별빛에 모으고 복사꽃 고운 뺨에 아롱질 듯 두 방울이야. 세사에 시달려도 번내는 별빛이라. 휘어져 감기우고 다시 접어 뻗는 손이 깊은 마음속 거룩한 합장인 양 하고 이 밤사 귓도리도 지새우는 삼경인데 얇은 사 하이한 곶갈은 고이 접어서 나빌래라. The Nun's Dance, Jiun Cho. Her white silk cowl, folded gently, wavers like a butterfly. Blue-shaved head veiled under the gossamer. The glow on her cheeks beautiful as a sorrow. A candlelight burns silently on an empty altar. The moonlight sets on every paulownia leaf. Her long sleeves reach across the vast heaven, her shapely white socks turned up as if flying on the wing. Her dark eyes rising softly focus on a single star in the far-off sky. Two teardrops glisten on her fair peach cheek. The anguish of worldly cares turns to starlight. Swaying, bending, and folding again, her hands are stretched out as if telling of devout prayer in her deep hurt. While the crickets cry away the night, her white silk cowl, folded gently, wavers like a butterfly. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.
Marvelous. Mie, thank you so much. Let's have her join us for some additional commentary. She should be with us in just a moment. Hi, Mie. Can you hear us? Hi. You're muted.
Hey. Yes. Can you hear me now?
I do hear you. We do hear you. It's great to have you here this evening. Thank you so much for your beautiful presentation of the poem in both Korean and English, and of course the context you provided. We talked about how you wanted to provide some additional insights into the painting and the poem together. And would you like me to bring up the painting?
Yeah, so please. I know, like, while we were filming, we just focused on the poem itself. So we didn't, like, I didn't have time to really introduce the relationship between the poem and the scroll actually shown in the video while I was reading the poem. So this scroll, oh, actually this is by Kim Hong-do, not the one I
Yeah, sorry, excuse me. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, let me show that.
So let me start while you are like pulling up the image. So the picture shown, like while I was reading the poem, is the Uno Kim scroll, like a folk dancers dressed as Buddhist nuns. Like in Korean, it's called Min Sungmudo. And when I said the title, like this folk dancers dressed as Buddhist nuns actually indicate that they are not nuns, but rather they are folk dancers dressed like nuns. And then I want to say this title itself actually indicates some key differences Jiun Cho really wants to make. So let me get back to the creation of the poem. Like Jiun Cho, in an essay titled The Secret of Poetry, which is kind of his memoir and compiled by his son later. And in that essay, he records how he created the poem. So this poem was created out of his kind of long, painful contemplation and research. And he said he really points out like several major influences, but Uno Kim's picture was one of his inspirations. So when he was 19, he saw a male monk dance in one temple's kind of ritual into one. the temple's name is Yongjusa, and the 19-year-old poet was awe-stricken at the time in the site, and then he was just devastated, weirdly, because he was not able to convey this poetic sensation after seeing the dance, and he was not able to convey that into language. But he said after 1 year, in age of 20, he visited like one exhibition. He saw Eunoki's picture about the nun's dance. And he does not specify like which picture was this. So, and Eunokim actually produced like several series of nun's dance. So we cannot say this girl was this, but at least we see an example of that. So anyway, the poet was standing in front of Eunokim's kind of scroll for 2 hours, and he said he really made like 7 to 8 sketches out of it. But after creating the poem, like Ji-Eun-cho really notes that even though he really borrowed a lot of like shapes, like a very concrete shapes he needed, but he said this scroll was about secular dance for pleasure or aestheticism, actually lacking the religious or spiritual expressions he really wanted to delineate, which was originally inspired by the temple's dance. So we can see like Ji-Eun-cho actually creates like a new dance of his own, like it's a woman's dance, not a male monk's dance he saw, but at the same time, he wants to differentiate from this, like some secular woman, but rather very spiritual female nun's dance out of it. Even though Ji-Eun-cho just mentions the picture was secular, but I also want to say this secularity actually includes the painter's kind of political move at the time. So I am right now, like about this Eunokim's this scroll, I am borrowing Joan Ki's study, published in 2018, which is called Modern Art in Late Colonial Korea. And borrowing Joan Ki's study, I'm saying Eunokim was one of the last court painters. He really had an excellence in drawing portraits. And after having this privilege to study at the Tokyo School of Fine Arts, Eunokim submitted this specific scroll you are seeing to the first Joseon Art Exhibition in 1922. And he got awarded in it. So this exhibition, the first exhibition held by the definitely Japanese government general of colonial Korea at the time, famously called Sunjeon right now, and it was one of their imperial campaigns for cultural assimilations, and clearly shown by their purposeful selections of Japanese jewelry. Eunokim became a favorite artist, partly because of their education background from Japan. And in this scroll, as you can see, the overall, like the way of meticulous fine lining and ornamental elements within the scroll actually merged the tradition of Japanese female figure painting, bijinga, with Korean female figure painting, miindo. So Ki notes that these two different traditions, like Japanese traditions, Korean traditions, merged and became interchangeable by the Japanese jewelers of this specific exhibition, and Eunokim was the product out of it. So, I mean, even though, understandably, there are still some controversies and movements that label Eunokim and his art school as anti-national and pro-Japanese collaborators, but frankly, Eunokim had a really long influence in modern Korean art, and also his school with the disciples, it's quite like a remaining in the Korean art scene. So I don't mean to make a kind of strict contrast between Ji-Eun-cho and Eunokim into a kind of formula of nationalistic poem and then pro-Japanese art. As I introduced, like it's kind of interesting to think, like Ji-Eun-cho said he was not able to depict secular women, but from our point of view, that is kind of an interesting point. So something Ji-Eun-cho was not able to depict was actually depicted by Eunokim at the time. So some current scholars are saying we can actually read the meanings of modern representations of women's bodies from actually Eunokim's paintings. So we can ask, like, what was a new way of depicting women's bodies at that time, particularly in that context of imperial, but also modernizing environment. So I really want to introduce this kind of complex context about this scroll. And then actually this scroll is on view for the first time in over like 15 years after conservation. So I really hope this history and also story can just welcome you. And then I really hope you can have a kind of time to read the picture by yourself. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's so fascinating, the tension between the poem and the painting, the political context that you uncover for us. Thank you so much. I'm really grateful. And we're going to share a little bit more about Every Day to the Extraordinary, the exhibition with Allysa, and then we'll bring you and Allysa and Tongyun back in. So you can just mute your video, that'll be fine. And we're gonna bring up Allysa.
So the objects in the exhibition range from all the way before the Common Era up into the 20th century. So you could think of the exhibition as kind of a timeline of Korean art history, where you can take a single object and delve deeper into the context surrounding it. For example, some of the earliest things we have in the exhibition are from the Three Kingdoms era, and you can see ceramic cup, pedestal stand, an architectural model, and we learn a lot about them because they were found in tombs. So that gives us some insight into belief about the afterlife and also about ancestor worship. And then all the way to the Joseon dynasty, so 14th century onward, we have some vessels that don't look super extraordinary in the cases here. They're kind of plain white pedestals, but they would be piled high with foodstuffs as offerings for the ancestors. So I think it's safe to say that the aesthetics of a particular time period are really informed by the cultural context of the age. Some of the objects in the exhibition might not have been considered extraordinary in their own time, but as time has shifted, we look at them with fresh eyes. Something like these rice.
Oops, I'm sorry. It looks like I had an error with the video sharing. Let me start that again and make sure I'm sharing the right screen here. I apologize.
So the objects in the exhibition range from all the way before the Common Era up into the 20th century. So you could think of the exhibition as kind of a timeline of Korean art history, where you can take a single object and delve deeper into the context surrounding it. For example, some of the earliest things we have in the exhibition are from the Three Kingdoms era, and you can see ceramic cup, pedestal stand, an architectural model, and we learn a lot about them because they were found in tombs. So that gives us some insight into belief about the afterlife and also about ancestor worship. And then all the way to the Joseon dynasty, so 14th century onward, we have some vessels that don't look super extraordinary in the cases here. They're kind of plain white pedestals, but they would be piled high with foodstuffs as offerings for the ancestors. So I think it's safe to say that the aesthetics of a particular time period are really informed by the cultural context of the age. Some of the objects in the exhibition might not have been considered extraordinary in their own time, but as time has shifted, we look at them with fresh eyes. Something like these rice cake molds here. Or one of my absolute favorites is this ladle here. It's just simply carved, would have been used every day in cooking in the kitchen, around the hearth, where women would practice their hangul, for example. And although as a museum visitor you can't hold it in your hands, I can say that there's something about it that it's kind of like your favorite spoon or mug at home. You just, you know it's just kind of a perfect fit, and you become attached to it in that way. So I hope that you'll enjoy the everyday objects in the exhibition just as much as the extraordinary ones.
Allysa, thank you for that extraordinary series of introductions to the exhibition. I'm inviting in my colleagues, Mie, Allysa, and Tongyun, to just chat a little bit about, hi, welcome all. chat a little bit about sort of what you saw in each other's presentations. We don't have a lot in the chat box, which is just fine. And if you have a question or comment, I'd love for you to jump in. I already commented earlier on the theme of cultural exchange and contact, engagement and resistance in the plum blossom theme in the poem and the vase. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that and any matters.
I just want to give effusive thanks to Tongyun Yin and Mihe Bang, because you really made the spirit of the exhibition come alive. You kind of continued on the theme, making those connections throughout the gallery, and looking at brushstrokes and poetry, and it was just perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, I would just like to jump in here and to share a few thoughts about the exhibition. I think I really like what about the exhibition is that in addition to the fantastic objects, is the idea, the theme Allysa chose to tie together such a diverse group of objects. Because when we talk about art, and normally we will think about the extraordinary immediately and kind of neglect those objects like similarly ordinary, especially the objects with practical functions. But art for art's sake is a very modern and Western concept. And in our Asian art collection at the Harn, we have so many objects that were not produced or used or even appreciated, at least initially, for their aesthetic values. Those objects were made for with political, religious, even utilitarian functions. So with the change of the historical and cultural context, the meaning of the objects also changed as well. And so I think this exhibition is very inspiring in that it not only showcases the best of our Korean art collection, but it also encourages us to ponder over some of the important, our perceptions about art. So what is art, and who has the authority to define art? And are the criteria of art universal or eternal, or they are open to be challenged or even changed in different time period? So that's, and also I really like your introduction, Allysa, about, because you mentioned a few times about the intersections, and also Eric mentioned the relationship between the visual culture and also material culture, food culture, and everything, poetry, literature. So I think the art exhibition and art objects kind of provide an entry point for each individual to approach art from their own perspectives. Mm-hmm. So I really like to invite everybody tonight, if you haven't seen the exhibition, come to the gallery and visit it, and just try to find your own path and approach to access these works of art.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, one thing I wanted to mention is that there is a video of the dance that's depicted in the painting that's being played in the gallery. So the space really comes alive with music and dance. And I wondered, Mihe, what you thought about that when you were doing your research on the poetry and the painter, and how it affected you in the gallery to have the music playing and seeing the dance.
Like, as you mentioned, like, frankly, when I get to the wing first, like it's a little bit dark. As you know, it's for conservation, I know that, but because of the dark, and then there is a kind of quaint object there. So even from a Korean perspective, like I just felt these kind of objects are just like unrelatable to my life. It's just like something out there. It's just art, as just Tongyun just said. But when I just like researched a little bit more about what these actually pictures speak, and then as you said, it seems just an ordinary picture about this dance, and then dance is dance, and then the way of depicting dances is there. But after I researched, I really could see that these pictures actually have very complicated ways of like narrating the object. So that was something very important. Like I really learned a lot from that experience. Like I cannot just ignore the object as it is there, like as something just stuck there, but rather it has a story in it. And the other one was, as I said, I thought it was a quaint, but when Tongyun explained about the plum vase, like a kimgichang is actually a disciple of a Eunho Kim. So these kind of like a heritage of from like Eunho Kim, and even before like the Chinese art and through the colonial Japan, and then even to the Korean, like modern Korean contemporary artists, there is some kind of very complicated heritage out there. So that was also some kind of feeling, like not just the knowledge, but rather I am actually living with it in my kind of age. So that was quite good experience for me.
Yeah. Oh, I love that, because there's so many connections, you know, between the artists even in the exhibition. So you said teacher student, there's fathers and sons, there's people, you know, interacting through trade. It's really interesting.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that the Asian wing can do. It's called the Asian wing, which sounds like a monolith, but it's never treated like that. It really, the curators, the diversity of artworks really allow for a focus on the specificity of different Asian arts and cultures, but also, because it is a wing that brings them together, interactions the way that you've all demonstrated tonight. I'm so grateful for everything you did to prepare for this evening and to share with us, and for the brief conversation we were able to have now. I'm really excited to bring in Professor, I know Lisa's super excited to bring in Professor Albala. So we have one more short video that really makes a connection between the exhibition and what Professor Albala is going to talk about. So Allysa, Mie, Tongyun, thank you so much for everything this evening, and you're welcome.
Thank you, Eric.
Enjoy the rest of the evening, where we're going to have a cooking demonstration. So one more video, and then we're bringing in Professor Albala.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Let me see if I can share my screen properly here this time. And off we go.
So some of the most outstanding achievements of the Goryeo dynasty from between about 918 and 1392 were in art and culture, and this was a time of great artistic production. And during that time, the celadon vases, like this mebyeong that you see here, were famous for their extraordinary production in Korea. So the color celadon is reminiscent of jade, which is a very valuable thing. And the Korean artists took that even further by doing inlay called sangam, which is different colored clays underneath. Now, for a long time, we thought that mebyeong were just to hold alcoholic beverages, and some of them are even still have the cap that was held on top. But in the last 3 decades or so, there have been shipwrecks that have been discovered, and because it was such a huge, flourishing time of trade all over, land routes, sea routes, these shipwrecks that have been found with ceramics, Korean ceramics from the Goryeo dynasty, we know a little bit more about what kind of materials were held in them. So a vase like this, found at the bottom of the sea, might be accompanied with wooden tags that said who it was intended for, what it held, and we know that honey and sesame oil were very valuable commodities at that time. So that's how the mebyeong relates to our special guest tonight, Ken Albala, who's not only a potter, a chef, but also a food historian. And he is going to make those connections between the sesame oil that would have been held in the mebyeong and the Korean cuisine demonstration that he's going to give.
Professor Albala is joining us now from his kitchen. Fabulous. Professor Albala is a professor of history at the University of Pacific in Stockton. I'm just going to let him get his camera all set up. In Stockton, California, where he's been recognized as a distinguished teacher. He lectures around the nation and the world on food and food history. He's published more than 24 books with wonderful titles. Hello, Professor Albala, excuse me. Titles like Eating Right in the Renaissance, Food in Early Modern Europe, and skipping a bunch of titles, the one that most fits tonight is Noodle Soup, Recipes, Techniques, Obsession. Sounds great. We are so pleased to have you join us, or to be able to join you in your kitchen. How are you this evening? Yeah, out in Stockton.
So it's still afternoon here, but it is about 95 degrees or so. So the recipe, as it may be in Florida, I don't know. But the recipe is a cold noodle soup. and it combines two of my favorite things. One is fermentation, so I'll show you how to do the soup base, which is based on radishes, and then I'll show you how to make the noodle, which I'm going to do the sweet potato version, which is really interesting. Wow. It's few people have made a sweet potato noodle. It's weird, but very, very chewy and lovely and refreshing. So the name of this dish is called gongchimiguksu, which is gongchimi is the radish itself. It's a winter radish, and ironically, this is a dish that people in Korea ate during the winter, which is, it's ice cold. You put ice in it, in fact. And those are radishes you can't get right now. But if you get a good daikon, this is perfect. You can even use red radishes, which are perfect. Any kind of radish works fine for this dish. And the idea is that you're gonna ferment this. And it's just a very basic procedure. It's a kind of kimchi, actually, but not one that's really complicated. So I'm really going to just peel this daikon. And you don't have to be really, meticulous with this. And I'm going to cut it up. And the first step is really just to let this salt sit in salt. And the measurements don't matter because obviously every daikon you have is going to be a slightly different size. And, how you cut it is really not so important either. So I'm just cutting it loosely into these nice chunks here. I'm going to put it in a bowl. And I'm going to add salt. And how much you add is really up to you. You can add about a tablespoon. I'm going to add 2 pinches, mix it around, which is, that's it. It doesn't matter because actually you're going to dilute it later. So if you'll taste it later, and when it gets to a saltiness that you like, you leave it. So what I've done is I just put it in this bowl, and I'm going to leave it there for a day. If it's hot out, leave it for about a day. If it's cold out, leave it for a couple of days. It's really it doesn't matter how long it goes, but what will happen is it will exude this water, bacteria will start to grow on it, and that will be the sort of starter that you have for this kimchi that goes. But the real key to the fermentation is the ginger. And the ginger you're gonna use with the peel on, and I'm just gonna use a few slices of ginger. I'm gonna put it in a little muslin, piece of muslin or cheesecloth is what I have here. Chili peppers, if you want. Remember, chilies didn't come to Korea until after 1492 and actually later in the 16th century, but we associate it so much with Korean food that it can kind of miss the heat if it's not there. So I'm gonna put this in. You won't actually eat it. It's just gonna give a little heat. I'm just scoring it a few times. I'm gonna put it into this little packet. I'm gonna add a bit of onion. This is a green onion, and I'm going to add a little garlic. You can use many cloves if you want. I like one for this batch. That's fine. It comes out. It will taste garlicky, which is exactly what you want. And this whole thing gets wrapped up after the a day or maybe a little more of sitting. You will add cold water to the radish, add this little packet of your ingredients to start it up and make it happy. And I'm just tying this with a piece of string like that. So I've got a little packet of this. I'm going to plop it in there afterwards. You don't need any real special equipment for this at all, just a bowl. I'm going to cover it with some some wrap, and then I will leave it there for another, let's say 3 or 4 days. It'll start to bubble. It'll smell sour and salty, and the aroma of the garlic will come out. And it becomes magical. Okay, let me show you what it looks like. I'm going to the fridge. After a few days, it'll get a little cloudy, and you'll get this when it'll bubble. And if you put it in a jar like this, it'll pop. And then you get this. It smells like pickle juice. It's really just a lovely sour, slightly garlicky, slightly spicy, salty, perfect for summer, refreshing drink. So I'm going to put this back in the fridge, but that's our base. Okay? And that will not take, it takes a week, but it's really no labor. You just leave it on the counter and let it go. And if you want to add other things to that, you can. People often add Asian pears for a little sweetness. I'll add this afterwards. Those are my garnishes for afterwards. But let's get to the really interesting and fun part, is the noodles themselves. And noodles have such an interesting history in Korea because the noodle was introduced to most of Asia from China. And the name of the noodle actually bears that. You know, when you see Naeng Mayon, Mian, Ramyeon, ramen, the mian in Chinese really just means noodle. So naengmyeon, mayon means a cold noodle. And so this is a cold noodle dish, but the thing that it's based on changes through time, or at least time and the geography of the place that it's made. So noodles are introduced, they're made with wheat. And wheat is actually the common thing to use nowadays. If you look for a recipe, they'll say add wheat noodles to it, boil, chill them, make them cold, and add it to the soup. And those are lovely, but they're not quite as difficult or as interesting to me, because you're not getting the real deep history from this. But the wheat noodles have been in Korea since the Silla dynasty, which is the equivalent of the Tang dynasty in China. So it corresponds to this long connection between East and West. It's when Tang, the capital of the Tang dynasty, Xi'an, connected to Baghdad. So you have sort of olives and polo, the game polo, I mean, not the shirts, obviously, and things sort of going back and forth between these two. The Silk Road, you know, it's older than that, but all sorts of interesting ingredients go back and forth. Wheat is in China earlier, but with Buddhism, it goes up into Korea, and there's noodles, but not everyone eats them. It takes a while for them to catch on, and here's the reason. Is wheat doesn't grow well in Korea. The summer, it's too cold, and they don't have the winter wheat varieties that will, you know, that obviously we're familiar with now, the hard wheat that grows in the Dakotas and such. So wheat is really not a great crop for Korea. So it really only catches on during the Goryeo dynasty, which you've been talking about with celadons. And I noticed as I was putting out my garnishes, I pulled out a little porcelain celadon plate cup that I made. So this was, and it is celadon and it's porcelain. So I thought, well, that kind of works really nicely. Okay, so the buckwheat noodles, which come with the Mongols, really, you know, it comes from Central Asia and spreads into Japan and spreads everywhere where there's a cold climate that is not hospitable to wheat. It's a really difficult grain to work with, because if you just go to the store and buy buckwheat flour, you will have a really hard time making it into a noodle. I know this, and because it's got the hull on it, it's brown, it's nutty, it's kind of like kasha, you know, that you'll eat in Eastern European food, which is the same way it gets there, through the Mongols, and it doesn't hold together really nicely into a noodle. So what you have to do is hull this, and hulled buckwheat is something that is much easier to work with. It holds together. It's what you make noodles out of in Japan also, and those are the the cold buckwheat noodles. The soba you'd find in Japan are made with that, and that was common, especially in Pyongyang. So we're talking about northern Korea. That's still very common there. You'll have a cold noodle based on buckwheat, which actually, if we have time, I'll show you how to do that too. I put a little bag of it out there just in case. But the one that I find really interesting and weird and sort of fascinating from a historical perspective is sweet potato. Because if you think of sweet potatoes, wait a minute, those are American. Those are, this is ipomea batatas. The word potato comes from batatas, which is the Taino word for sweet potato. So how does that get to Korea? Well, they were brought by the Portuguese and into South Asia, with the Spanish to the Philippines. They make their way to Korea, and there is an idea, this is one historian's thesis, that they were so easy to grow, especially in hillsides and places where rice wasn't good to grow, that they stimulated population growth, and people caught on to the sweet potato because it doesn't take a whole lot of work. You plant them, they grow underground, they're there, you just leave them there basically until they're ready to harvest. That the population grew because of the sweet potato. Now, what's weird is you don't think of like Asian cuisine as sweet potatoes, but in fact they are very, very important to most of these cultures. But the interesting thing is how would you make a noodle out of a sweet potato? You'd have to grate it very finely You'd have to soak it in water. You'd have to let the starch precipitate. You can do this at home, actually. It takes an hour or so. And then pour off the water, and you have this very fine starch, which I'm going to show you how to use. It's this stuff. You can buy it now. This one comes from Taiwan. But sweet potato starch is an important kind of ingredient. And what I'm going to do is, I'm obviously not going to measure this, but I'm putting about a cup of this sweet potato starch. That's what the package looks like. If you go to an Asian grocery store, you can find this. And if you can't find sweet potato starch, use the much easier one to use is actually rice starch and tapioca. Use 3/4 part rice starch, 1/4 part tapioca. It's the easiest noodle on earth to work with. Much easier than wheat, in fact. And this you can just add hot water, make globs with your hand, throw it into boiling water, make noodles. I've done this with little kids. It's so easy. And this is my favorite noodle, I have to say. The sweet potato is a little elusive because it's hard to work with, but I'm going to show you how to do it. And I'm going to do this by hand just because there's no other real way to do this. And there's no easy way to measure this either, which is the weird thing, because depending on the brand you use, depending on the moisture in the air, every measurement I have used has eluded me. So this is the device I'm going to use. It's an extruder. And these go back to ancient times. It looks like a weird modern device. It's just a hand extruder. In the past, they would have been more like a ricer. So you'd put the dough into it, you'd press it down, and it would come through holes. They've got little holes in the bottom of the disc. It's really, really simple. If you want a device like this, you can buy them on Amazon. It's like $20. And it's my favorite thing because it makes all of these extruded noodles. I have a big sort of Italian torchio, which is it hooks up bolts into the table here, and it turns, and it makes, you can turn a rock into a noodle with that thing. I mean, it's great, but it takes like an hour to clean the thing afterwards. This takes a minute. So this is why I like it. But here's the delicate part. Let me show you this sort of carefully. This is where it's very easy to go wrong. Okay? Because I've got the starch here, and I'm going to add boiling water, but so little at a time that you think this is never going to come together. It's far less than you think. So don't just dump the water in, because then it'll be too much. And whatever you do, and I have made this mistake myself in public with many people, don't put the starch in the water because then it boils, it denatures, it totally loses its. So what you're trying to do is make the starch glutenized and just become a little gluey. I'm just bringing the water back up to the boil. And I'm going to cook in the same water. Can you see the pot right there? Yeah, okay, you can. I think you can. And I'm just going to pour a tiny bit in and stir it around with my spoon. I've got maybe a tablespoon in there now to a cup of sweet potato starch. And I'm going to stop there because you never know. And I'm going to put my hands right in. And yes, this hurts. This is the price of art. You have to have pain if you want to succeed. And it still looks like this is never going to come together, but it does. I think that's probably enough. That maybe tablespoon and a half, maybe. And if I need a little more, I'll add it. But just don't dump water in.
What does it feel like? What's the texture?
Go overboard. Okay, can I show you what it's like? What it looks like? Okay, beautiful. It's still a little flour. And here's the weird thing: it smells really strange too. It's got this very odd. I can't even describe what it's like. I'm just going to add another teaspoon. And I think that, ow, it does hurt. I think that's probably going to be enough. It turns a slightly gray color, and you can actually buy these in an Asian store too. The noodles themselves, the sweet potato noodles they take like an hour to cook. So I think this is a much easier way to do it. I'm just going to add a tiny bit more. I actually walked to get these today. I usually walk, and I thought, let me just go up to the Asian market. And by the time I got there, it was already 1,000,000 degrees. And it was 12 miles by the time I got home, but that's fun. Okay, so you can see how this is a dough. Totally has come together, sticking. Now here's the thing about this, the longer the noodle, the more it is auspicious for a long life. So if you go to a Korean restaurant, sometimes they cut them for people, you know, with scissors, I know, which sounds so weird. The waiter comes by with scissors and cuts the noodles for you, which sounds odd, but there's no reason to it. It's actually fun to have this long slurping noodle. And I want you to see what this is like. It's just a dough, okay? There's nothing, it doesn't feel like a bread, like a you know, wheat dough, but it will work fine, okay? And I'm gonna roll it into a cylinder, plop it into this machine, put the top on, and the idea is I wanna have these as long, there's no salt involved also. I know that sounds weird, but it messes with the chemistry of the whole thing. I'm gonna get my knife ready. And if you can you see that? Let me just move this over an inch. I'm going to.
Yeah, it looks great.
Okay, and you can see the noodles coming out. I hope that they will be at least a couple of feet long. And I'm just gonna
beautiful.
Go all the way with these. Okay, there we go. And they only take about a minute to cook. There we go. I think that, nope, it still want to go. All right, I'm gonna cut them off, stir them. Let's count to 60. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the way that they come out is this wonderful chewy texture. I can't describe what it's like. It's you know, when you have like a lamyan, which has lye or alkali in it, and it just turns slightly grayish, and it gets this really wonderful chewy texture, and like a good ramen also. This has that same thing. And I don't know, let me show you what it looks like. I'm almost done. I'm gonna give this 1 minute to cook because I want it to stay nice and firm. They're perfectly fine. But I want to show you what they look like. Oops, another stir. Is that 1 minute? Probably. You can also do this with regular potato starch. You can do it with cornstarch, weirdly enough. And regardless of what the package says, this says sweet potato flour. It is actually the starch. It's not flour. It's not just a sweet potato ground, you know, dried and ground. Okay, so this looks fine. Let me show you what this looks like. I'm gonna make it cold now, obviously. You see in there? All right, let me just rinse this off. Cold water. Okay, now take a look. They're noodles. They are perfectly lovely separated. They're slightly grayish, but the texture is slippery and chewy, and I love these noodles. Okay, so here's what we're gonna do. Assemble it all. All right. Noodles go in. And I know this seems really strange to put it in a stainless steel bowl, but that's the way we serve it. I'm going to shred some cucumber on the top of this. Let me get my little grater here. Because remember, we want cold, we want refreshing. Okay, cucumber, Asian pear. Just gonna give it a little sweetness. My quail eggs, which I think I'm just gonna put in there, arranged like that. It already smells so good. And then I'm gonna get my broth, which has radishes in it.
I've never
Radishes are there.
with quail eggs. Are the quail eggs already cooked, or you just put them in shell and all?
Yeah, hard boiled. Totally, just hard boiled. They cook and taste exactly like regular eggs. They're just cute. That's the only reason to do it. And I'm just pouring this radish water over, putting some radishes in. And if you want to go all the way, use Korean chopsticks, which are metal also. They're flat and metal, and you eat with a very long spoon as well. So that's for the broth, that's for the metal, that's for the chopsticks. But the key, and this is what I find the best thing about this, is ice cubes right in your soup. So like, does that make any sense? It sort of mellows it a little. It totally makes sense. It's the most delicious thing. And I'm gonna have to just show you what it tastes like now.
It looks great.
And they're so long. Now you could put this in another bowl. Obviously, you don't want to eat right out of this. This is a serving bowl. So we come to the table and this, the apple, then the pear. There's this sweetness, and you think, does that go with garlic? It actually really does. The radishes are pickled, they're sour. There's a little egg. There's the little radishes right there, which are perfectly crunchy and sour. And if you were a real pickle head, I'm gonna have dinner right now. If you're a real, let this sit for a good week. You can let this go, and it's magnificent. Really, really sour. If you like more garlic, add more. If you like more chili, so that's for long life. The long noodle.
So fantastic.
Does it work that way? I don't know. I'm open if it's possible.
I'm sorry, I cut you off when I spoke. I couldn't hear you. What was the last thing you said?
Can I entertain questions, or is this I was thinking about half an hour. So
Yeah, no. I have a question, which is I'm so interested in sort of the pace. On the one hand, this is a slow meal because you start it the day before, or maybe a week before, for the fermentation. But on the other hand, it is a rapid meal, and there's something interesting about that slow fast. And I'm curious if that's something you've experienced in other kinds of specifically Korean meals or other cuisines that don't reflect that. Like, that doesn't seem French to me particularly.
Well, it's true about so many cuisines around the world, especially in places where it's hot. And if you cook outside, it's not a big deal because then you set up your pot on 3 rocks and you don't worry about the heat. But if you're working inside in the kitchen, it always pays to have things in store. So you go into any good Korean household, the fridge will be packed with dozens of kinds of kimchi and pickles and salted vegetables and crabs, with all the delicious things that make Korean food wonderful. You don't make them all in one day. You make them sort of in a pace throughout the week, and then when dinner time comes, you take out all your containers, you serve all these little nubbly things. So the dinner really doesn't take a whole lot of time to cook. And in this case, this was 10 minutes or something, from beginning to end. It was just the week before, you just have to plan a little and make the pickle to start with. But if you're doing like even a standard kimchi, you make a big bucket of this and it lasts you for a few weeks.
It's delightful. And you really didn't use too much specialized cooking equipment. Of course, the noodle press, which is like Play-Doh.
Well, it is. You can use a ricer for this also. You know what I mean by a ricer?
Yeah. Sure, yes.
The standard thing that's used to squash potatoes. I don't know why it's called a ricer. It should be called a potatoer. But you can put the dough in that and press it down, and it works perfectly fine too.
Great. So fascinating. I mean, thank you for sharing the cooking, and your depth of knowledge about the history of cuisine is remarkable. Can you tell us a little bit about how you started as a food historian?
Sorry, Robbie wanted to clean the kitchen. Sorry, say that again.
Oh, he's just asking, how did you get your start as a food historian? I know you did an MA at Yale and a PhD in history at Columbia. Were you studying food as a graduate student, or is this something that you got to do after tenure?
No, that's a great question because I started working on food when my advisor said, you need a dissertation topic. And I was like, okay, what do I do? How do I find a dissertation topic? And he said, well, go across the park. I was at Columbia, and go into the New York Academy of Medicine and look around there, go through the files. And I was like, medicine? Why? I never showed any interest in medicine. And he said, well, you know, they have really comfortable chairs. And the people are nice. And I thought he was joking, but he was being absolutely serious. And he was correct. It was a great place to do research. I parked myself there for 3 years, read all of Renaissance dietary literature, and got a dissertation and a first book out of that. And so I've never written about anything but food. But I have to say, when I got to my present job, which was 25 years ago, they didn't think it was a legitimate topic. So all of my colleagues who were hired about the time I was born, as they retired, I did more and more food, and then finally, put it into the curriculum as a permanent course. And it's always been the biggest course in the department. So, that's been fun. But the world, I had a good jump start, let's put it that way, on food history. But I've never written about anything else, really.
Wonderful. So you clearly began with a focus on Renaissance nutrition, food history, diet. Was it being in California that allowed you to begin to think about Asian cuisine, or was it the Silk Road connections? How did you begin to explore beyond the Renaissance and to other parts of the world beyond?
That is a question that I really had never thought about before, but I was pretty much a Renaissance historian. I grew up in New York and obviously, lived in that area and on the East Coast. When I came here, the groceries that you can buy are mostly Asian or Mexican or Italian. And those are the things. And Italian, I kind of already had my home base in Renaissance Italy. So I still do all my shopping, most of my shopping there. But you're absolutely right. It was being in California, living in the context of those communities that suddenly made me think, I need to know how to make dumplings correctly. I need to know how to make a good pho. I need to make, all this stuff that was done because the ingredients were here and the food and the people are here. And I know the people. So it was kind of like, how could I live here and not take advantage of that in a way that, as it turns out, this is a better place than almost anywhere in the country for ingredients. Not a restaurant scene here, but for buying ingredients, it's unbelievable. And in fact, when fall comes, I'll be able to buy the correct, radish to use in this.
That's lovely. So I'm going to let you go soon. It's been lovely visiting with you in your kitchen, cooking with you, and learning with you. My last question is, do your students have to cook you a meal to pass their final exam?
It's usually the other way around. They want me to cook for them to get good, student evaluations, but logistically, I've never been able to do it. But I do sometimes teach courses elsewhere that are, graduate level or that are basically in the kitchen, and I've got series. If anyone's interested, I've got my food history series is on the great courses, but I also have a historic cooking one, which is shot in the exact spot where I'm standing right now at the stove. And it's 24 episodes from ancient times to the Can Opener Cookbook by Poppy Cannon. And I'm hoping to do another one. COVID kind of put a damper on everything, but it was so much fun that, it's kind of like, how do I say? If you grew up watching Julia Child and The Galloping Gourmet on TV, and suddenly you get to do it, that's all I can say.
Yeah, well, that's absolutely lovely. I do hope that we can lure you out to Gainesville, Florida, in the near future when travel is a thing we do again with the drop of a hat. Until then, thank you very much. Be well, enjoy your hot afternoon out in Stockton, and we're grateful to you for really connecting cuisine to the exhibition at the Harn. It's been everyday cooking, but it's been extraordinary.
Well, thanks so much.
Good night, Ken. Thank you.
Take care.
very much. Bye-bye. And so we're wrapping up museum nights now. This has been so fabulous. We've had poetry, we've had ceramics and painting, we've had cooking. We've been all over thinking about the politics of art and the pleasures of art, and cultural exchange across political lines and across continental lines. So this has been eye-opening for me and just a wonderful event. Thank you for joining us. We have another Museum Nights coming up in June 10th, which will be Framing Florida. We'll be focusing on our wonderful exhibition of the new collection of Florida-themed art at the Harn Museum. It's really remarkable, and I know that you'll enjoy discovering that with us. Until then, check us out online at harn.ufl.edu/harnathome for amazing creative activities you can do with your kids, with your parents, with your friends, any age. They're a lot of fun. There's just so much online. Of course, our YouTube channel, where you may be now, is a place to discover more museum nights and lectures and conversations with artists that are just amazing opportunities to go into artist studios and to hear from artists about their work. So thank you for joining us. Have a great evening, and I wish you good health and a good month until we see you in 30 days or so. Thanks very much, and good night.